I would say that there are probably two aspects that fascinate me about Hilma of Klint. The first one is the most simple one. I would say the most logical one when we talk about an artist, and it is the fact that you go to an exhibition and you have a very intense aesthetic experience. So you go there and you are stunned. You see things and you have this reaction, which is also an emotional reaction. And secondly, the second aspect that I find particularly interesting is the connection to esotericism. And this clearly had a strong connection with the fact that she was producing these kind of works. She had a life that was mostly placed in the first half of the 20th century. You are in the period that is usually called the Belle Époque. So this is the period from before the First World War. Now, what is interesting is that perhaps that period of time is not so different from our period today. It had been quite some time that there hadn't been any big wars. So people were living sort of leisurely. The economy was okay with some ups and downs, and yet you can tell that there was a feeling of, disquiet, some kind of unrest, perhaps a feeling of crisis even. Perhaps this is also what we are feeling now. So the question might be, how does it come that the works of Hilma were not appreciated then? And they are appreciated in such a massive way today. I believe that in Hilma's times, perhaps there was already the possibility to appreciate what she was doing. I wonder, perhaps if she had exhibited her works, let's say in more conventional contexts, the works themselves might have been appreciated. That's a possibility. So we will never know. We don't know. But at the same time, there was another disadvantage. So it was not just about the revolutionary character of her works from an aesthetic point of view. There was also the fact that she was a woman. And I think that at that time, there are not so many examples of artist women who were that successful. So if you think of the protagonists of the avant-garde period, so early years, let's say first 2 decades of the 20th century, you realize that they were almost all men. Now that says something. It says that it's not just about the aesthetic, it's not just about the form, it also has to do with gender, and that's an important part. In fact, this is an element that has been emphasized in literature, in scholarly literature about Hilma of Klint, and rightly so, because it does play a role. So you might say, perhaps if she had exhibited her works, people might have still appreciated them, but maybe the history wouldn't have changed, because perhaps she wouldn't have had the same success that artists like Kandinsky, for instance, or Mondrian did have, because there was the other disadvantage that might have played a role as well. So who knows, maybe the story in the end wouldn't have changed that much. For me, as an historian of esotericism, the interesting question is, what does esotericism play there? So it's interesting to explore what we know, for instance, about trance, the state of trance, altered states of consciousness, the feeling of being dispossessed of your agency, that somebody else, kind of entity, is taking possession of your body and doing with your hand something that you are not even aware of. So that in fact, when you have the work of art as a final result of this process, you almost don't recognize it. You don't think that this is the product of your art, that this has been in fact produced by something else that was taking possession of you. So that's a fascinating phenomenon, I would say. Now, here I would say it is clear that times have changed and the zeitgeist is a little bit different. Because you could say that in the early 20th century, the prejudice against esoteric ideas, against alternative spirituality, was probably stronger than it is today. Now, of course, you had at the time artistic, intellectual, and literary elites that were interested in esotericism, but it was in fact an elite phenomenon. Now, today things have changed, and themes related to the occult, to esotericism, are now widespread. They, you can find them in popular culture, you can find them in popular music, you can find them in all sorts of media. Think only of the example of Dan Brown's novels. Think about Harry Potter. You just need to have a look at the list of the films that are being released, and you will find that very often they have to do with this kind of themes. And this means that the reaction that people have against them is not the same as it was in the past. So one could think maybe in Hilma's times one would have a bit of a resistance to be too open about certain interests. And probably even more if you were a woman. So that's, I would say, an important difference with respect to the zeitgeist or the times of Hilma. I think that part of the incredible global success of Hilma af Klint has to do with being in tune with a certain zeitgeist that we have today. So with a certain fascination for spiritual themes. But it cannot be the case that hundreds of thousands and probably at some point even millions of people will go to exhibitions of Hilma af Klints works and react so strongly, and the exhibitions are being so successful only because people relate to the spiritual side of the works. I don't believe that. I think that people go and like Hilma af Klints works simply because they are incredible art. I think that the future success of Hilma af Klints works is ensured. I don't think it's going to decrease or to diminish in the future. I think that once it is established, it's going to stay. It's here to stay simply because it is incredible art.